Welcome to Connection is the Medicine podcast. I'm your host, Eden Shante. Today I welcome a very special guest, Akah Jackson. He's a medical Qigong instructor, a recovery coach, Kundalini teacher, and great percussionist. Akah is an incredible storyteller, and I so enjoyed sitting down with him and hearing his stories of connection. I'll share more about Akah in the show notes, but for now, let's dive right into this show, which I know you're going to enjoy. Welcome, Akah.
Thank you.
We're here in the circle of connection. So you were just sharing that you wanted to help us connect. So help us.
All right. A way to tune in to that inner connection to source. And it's the way we do when we're in the garden practicing our Qi Gong. Just a simple pulling down the heavens to synchronize our breath and our body movements and to allow that resonance between us to awaken. Since we have practiced in the garden together, just awakening that. So I'll just ask you to put your feet flat on this floor.
Yes.
As we just hold the palms towards the lower abdomen. And if you like, I invite you to close your eyes and just begin for a moment feeling the inhale. Feel the exhale. And just sense how you're designed. Feeling the inhale, bringing in everything you need. That connection to life. And exhaling, letting go what's no longer needed so you can be you. And we'll mindfully allow the hands to fall away from the thighs and come out to the side as we exhale all the air out. Let the palms face Mother Earth. Hold the breath out for a moment. And now inhale, raising the arms up. At shoulder level, keep inhaling, pivot the wrists so the palms face up. And inhale, bringing the hands overhead. On top of the inhale, let the hands pause for a moment. And exhale, let the hands float down the midline of the body. And bringing the hands to face the lower abdomen. Feeling the breath, feeling the connection to Mother Earth through the feet. And we give thanks for allowing this conversation to connect to those who can hear. And allow the love to spread in this circle of connection. Thank you for playing with me, everybody.
Thank you, Akah.
Yay. Thank you, Eden.
So let's begin with you sharing a little bit about when you first came into connection or recognized connection in your life.
Wow. So born in Jersey City, New Jersey, this being was. And the roots of my family, matriarchally, my mother's roots, come out of Alabama. So early on, about 6 months old, I was taken to Alabama from Jersey City, and I connected. And I say this because I have a memory of sand, like feeling sand between my toes and feeling sand with my hands. And later on, I got the story that my Aunt Mamie, who is a medicine woman in Alabama, she learned from her father. They call her Pine Woods Bush Doctor. That's how they would call her. She was the clinic for the community. Because at that time, they didn't have facilities, health facilities, for people that were coming out of slavery. And there were these herbalists and spiritual healers who were the first line of health for the community. And that meant everybody. Anybody that was in the community would go and get serviced. So there was no segregation in those type of services that were provided in the community. And I got the story that she brought in sand for me to be able to play on when I visited. So I could remember this as my connection to nature, because that's what Alabama represents. As after that time, then I went to be with my grandfather, my mother's father, on his farm. And there would be days, 5, 6, 7 years old. My responsibility was to run the fence and make sure everything was intact. No animals got loose. There was no breaks in the fence. Everything was in order, because he rented land to people and they grew peanuts. So if the pigs got out, they were going to disturb those peanuts in a great way, because that was the most delicious thing in the area for those pigs. So I had to make sure everything was intact. 5:30 in the morning, we'd get up with the smell of biscuits, and I'd go out, and I wouldn't come back home. I would forage. There were these grape-like vines. They call them scuff-nines or muscadines, with these deep purple, and they were quite big, like a small cherry, even a huge cherry. Sometimes you get lucky and you get a real big one, and it's full of the sweetest juice, thick skin, so it pops in your mouth. And then there's this meaty core. It's rather large, but very sour and full of the seeds. And the seeds are bitter, and that sour, meaty core combined with that sweet juice. Oh man, sometimes you get them if they're small and you chew on the skin as well. Very deep purple skin. It's said to be rich in resveratrol, higher than any other grape-like fruit. And I really feel those days of foraging, discovering I can eat raw corn, getting plums, wild plums off the trees, and figs. Sometimes figs were being able to, and I'm guided, I'm just playing. Everything is a wonder. If it rained, I raced leaves or built boat structures in the ditch and raced them. I didn't think about getting out the rain. Didn't feel like I had a need. So those years, I may not have thought about connection. But as I sit here at 62 years old and think about nature and all the wonders of nature, at those moments, the sand between my toes, and being able to later on stand up in it and walk around in it. I never wore shoes when I was down there. So I really feel that education of being connected to the energy of life that manifests with this earth, that manifests into plants and animals and two-legged beings. All of that, I felt even in Jersey City, at now moved towards not going anymore, because I want to, at 10, let's see, at 12 years old now, I want to experience life like other people are experiencing life as preteens and the teenagers, and wanting to connect with the beautiful young ladies like I see the older people on the city block connecting, and this life that's unfolding, going to clubs, or, just this being in sports, like this connection to society and what it offers from its stimulation.
So what age were you in Alabama, and when did you transition to New Jersey, or were you back and forth?
I was always back and forth up till the age of about 11. So from at times 6 months, maybe again about a year and a half. Then there was a little break. Then I went again around 5 years old. So from 5 till about 11 every summer for sure, sometimes Christmas. And during those times, I was in nature. And when I got back, I realized that I was faster than my peers.
Hmm.
I was stronger, and so there was this sense of invincibility that really grew fast. I guess we could call that confidence as well in my physical abilities. 'Cause I ran the fence every day, 2 times a day. I didn't just walk it. It was no fun to just walk. So to run it and play and be like a horse or be like a gazelle or be like a cheetah. These were the things running through my mind. Be a Black Panther. So it was around 12 years old. I didn't want to go anymore. I wanted to try to be in the city because I always felt like I missed out. Everybody would say, "Oh, you missed it. You missed such and such and this and that," when I was gone. But as I sit here today, I can see and remember the value of not thinking about the value, but realizing I was stronger and faster.
I wonder if those times and what you gained through that connection to nature are impacting you today just subconsciously, like within your cells and
Eden,
energy field.
Eden, I can testify that there is maybe intangible, but a very important connection to the order of creation that exists in nature. And if I was out of alignment with it,
Hmm.
trying to live into some other paradigm than the one that's connected to my lineage, and because my mammy said that I had the mark to carry the family medicine tradition on, for example. So just thinking about that connection to nature for a moment. I'm
Yeah.
barefooted all the time,
Hmm.
and I'm eating whatever nature guides me to through the course of my exploration of the farm. Because this farm is about, combining family land, it's about 300 acres. And the part that's where my grandfather was taking care of is about 100 acres. So I could just roam, find watermelon patches. And of course, he may be renting them to other farmers. But I mean, you see a whole 2 or 3 football fields of watermelons. Who's going to miss one? Right? you know? And then you can run and take it and break it open. And it's just a bright orange. And you could just take the heart with no seeds and just dive my face into it. I say I want you to get that feeling, everyone, because when I wanted to hang out in Russell Simmons' basement in Jersey City, where on Friday nights they would go in the late evening. He was a DJ, did the popular spots around town and in New York. And so he was kind of a celebrity on the block because he got a chance to DJ in New York, at the clubs in New York. And so all the young ladies my age wanted to hang out there. So I wanted to see what was going on that made them want to hang out over there. So I'm situating myself, hanging out, this, kind of after school. Everybody's kind of coming in and out. And then all of a sudden it gets to be the evening time. And now the street lights are coming on. So I'm supposed to report home. But I'm thinking, I can get away. My mother's not home from work yet. And they were like, you need to get out of here, young boy. Go ahead. Then you hear somebody else say, schoolboy, get out of here. You need to go study something somewhere. You don't belong here. And I feel that was the voice of nature, knowing where I come from, knowing where I'm to go. And whatever was going on there wasn't part of my destiny. And those things would roll out of their mouth as if they knew me, as if they were the voice of nature themselves, that knew my heart, and knew what I was here for.
Hmm.
They say, go study something. Get out of here. Go make something of yourself. So that was really one indication. I can continue on. I feel like nature, the connection to nature was bringing me invitations. And I think it was around 19 years old when I began to consider. I grew up in the church, was an usher boy, and my family could be considered religious. And more so coming out of the South and the farming aspect of it, there was this awareness of nature and how to follow it, when to plant, watching the animals, how to take care of them, how to feed them, how to respect when fire, the elements, and when to use it to clear, the old and allow it to be reincorporated to nourish the soil. Like this attention to the flow and rhythm of nature.
Mm-hmm.
I can say that having that connection to our creator, the source of our breath, and then when I discovered it for myself, at 18 and a half, I was in a pre-med program at Montclair State University. Now it's a university. It was college at the time. And here's another aspect of connection.
Mm-hmm.
I was in high school having a hard time with school. So I scholastically wasn't able to keep up with the program at St. Peter's Prep. And I had to go to the public high school for my last year.
Was that because of time or that you put in? Were you distracted or
It
what?
was, I got diagnosed later when I was doing a graduate program, and it was suggested I go see a learning disability psychiatrist. And they diagnosed me with slow tempo disorder, a type of ADHD.
Mm-hmm.
So I can recognize the struggles I was having with regard to just understanding my learning style so that I could compensate where it was needed so I can keep up with the workload.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't have those kind of eyes on me, to be able to look. And I did have what the learning psychiatrist said is that what probably happened is because I had a genius level of images and shapes and putting them together and organizing things. And I do remember having, like, if a paragraph had a certain sound to the words in it and a certain shape to it, I could remember
Mm-hmm.
it verbatim and just look at the paragraph in my mind, especially if it was a multiple choice question. I can really see the words that were there in the paragraph, and if they showed up somewhere in the question, they would really stand out for me.
Mm-hmm.
So I had those abilities, but I didn't know how to utilize them. And it was when I was introduced to Tai Chi and hearing the language of the Taoists, and it connected to my short stint of Aikido at 12 years old, and they talked about the Qi, or life force.
Mm-hmm.
And so this connection to source began to emerge. And I'm living on my own in New York at this time because we moved to New York when I was 16 years old.
Wait, you're living on your own.
On my own. 18 and a half is when my mother had to leave to take care of her father's land because he made his transition. He dropped his earth coat, became an ancestor, and then my mother went to go take care of the land and build her dream house with the timber and everything that he left for her. So I was left to finish a pre-med program, go to medical school, and live life according to the American dream.
Hmm.
So it was a big struggle of finding my source, being distracted by emotional past of childhood trauma. It was a rocky road for my family in the beginning, the first 3 years, and my father left in a violent way. But it was that moment where it all started to come together, that there is a source to recognize.
It's like there's a thread that's been weaving through that began on that fence line and moved into Aikido and then moved into Tai Chi.
The sand between my toes gave me awareness of Mother Earth, and thinking about these little crystalline structures of the sand was connecting me to the core and the essence of my, if I'm to say Christos, that Christos being that crystalline nature, that pattern that the Creator designed me to be. Began to have a language beyond the story of Christ in the church when I met my first sensei in Aikido, and this talk of redirecting energy, and the story of a samurai warrior who wanted to protect the people and show the people how to protect themselves from the rogue samurais that were working for various emperors that just wanted to have control, and no longer was the samurai there to protect the people, just the few that remembered the codes. And he spoke to us about learning to have the energy of our hands to protect people and to redirect harmful energies that want to come towards us. And that was really something that my 12-year-old mind was connecting to. I didn't know how, but there was a connection awakening, because I remember hearing the same kind of conversation in Tai Chi when I started learning Tai Chi. And the warm up is Qi Gong. And as I was beginning to continue moving through life, so here I am, 19 years old, emotionally disturbed, not knowing how to keep up with everything going on, maintaining an apartment, going to school, and keeping everything going, working at UPS from, you know, uh, work from 12 at night to 6 in the morning, and then get home and maybe nap and get ready for a 9 o'clock class, usually. So, you know, what it is to make it in this world and to experience some sense of support. Like, what's there to support me? What questions that I had? And that leans into the connection to source. If I would burn frankincense and myrrh, because that would clear the space so I can have a connection to something that would support me. I was looking for that support. And I met a gentleman from Jamaica. He had a very strong entrepreneurial spirit. And at the time, I was finding my connection to that place of peace through arts. There was a moment in the pre-med program where I discovered I could take other classes if I went to my academic counselor rather than the pre-medical program counselor. So one semester, I went to my academic counselor. I didn't report to my program counselor in the pre-med program. And I took an acting class, I took an art class, drawing class, and I took a karate class. and and yoga.
That's quite a combo.
Yeah, the acting class was incredible. But I got to say, what stood out, even though the talk about ki and karate and the prana and yoga and movement and connection, it wasn't really anything that this particular yoga at college was more about the athletics of it, the the workout, the sweat, wasn't really anything about the principles of yoga. But between acting and meeting Miss Mohammed in the drawing class, who studied with Picasso, and she was an African American elder, and she held the African American students to high standards. She made us stand up to speak. And she took us outside one day, talk about connection. And she took us to an area where it had these beautiful trees. And she said, pick a tree and draw it. Eden, I had never even thought about such an activity was possible. She said, pick a tree and draw it. My closest connection to drawing something at that time was my little doodles, or maybe imagining going into medical illustration. I was fascinated with that, but I never thought about drawing nature. And it really almost disturbed me. Like, how am I going to do that? And I went up to her, I was like, well, how am I going to draw a tree? And she looked at me. She said, just look at the tree and draw what you see. Wow. And my whole picture was just the connection to the earth and just about 2 feet up the trunk. So that as I talk to you and connect with your eyes, I think about what that 19-year-old, 21-year-old is thinking. That's what emerged out of what he saw in that first attempt to draw a tree. That's all it was. It was the grass and the way the trunk was connecting to the soil.
Hmm.
And that's all I could fit in the picture at that time. So as I look at you, I think about this connection to nature, the connection to my roots that I was really wanting. I thought if I knew my roots, then I can have some peace inside, because there was a lot of emotional noise going on. That was a moment. That was a moment of connecting to my roots.
And where did that lead? What opened for you as you moved through Tai Chi and some experience with Qigong and arts and acting, and you were still in school at this time?
Mm-hmm.
What unfolded next in the river of your life?
Oh man, just thinking about the connection to family when you said that. Because what was swarming within is the storm of emotions. How do I keep up with this perception of who I am as someone who is demonstrating a presence of a healing ability, or an ability to connect with the healing arts? And so this journey of becoming a doctor is present, but the ability to keep up with it isn't. The ability to feel it is not there. The inspiration to want it is not there. Juxtapose everyone in my family seeing that it's the perfect fit for me.
Mm-hmm.
As I was always asked, as a younger child, even I can remember at 5, it would just massage my shoulder. You have these healing hands. Well, massage my shoulder some more. I could hear my aunties asking for that. Yet I'm not connected to it. And I think we've talked a little bit about the shadow side of connection. And I, in this moment, realize that where I was directing my thoughts at that time, I was entertaining this sense of something's wrong with me.
Mm.
And therefore, now there's the connection to these thoughts that are generating stories that I'm entertaining. And I use that word entertaining as a way to demonstrate I'm connecting to them in a way where I'm letting them live as a character that has something wrong with me. How can I fix myself? And at the time, I was fixing myself with marijuana and then attempting to have some connection to what was expected of me and looking to find my way to be connected to a sense of purpose that is also connected to my family that is looking at me a certain way. And if I have that acceptance of my family, then that'll stop the noise. But I just couldn't make my way out of the noise. And I got invited to do some work, artistic work. I was doing a lot of drawing, contemplating now this was a place where I could think in peace when I was drawing. And by now I got to the branches of the trees and I'm filling it in more and more. But, as I was drawing the trees, they didn't have leaves, which was interesting as I think about it in the early days. But I met this Jamaican gentleman, strong entrepreneurial being, had his own line of products as far as jewelry and things out of beads. And then he sold other things, whether it was incense or, and then cultural items that were from Jamaica. Of course, the classic red, gold, and green attire, whether that's belts or shorts or T-shirts. And we got to, I would go visit. It was a place to go and kind of get out of my world of studies, physiology, biology, botany, genetics. I worked in the tissue culture lab in the genetics department. And so it was a way to get out of that and kind of had some cultural connection.
So it was in the neighborhood?
125th Street in Harlem,
Ah,
Harlem, New York. And they had this entrepreneurial endeavor of the city was to support small businesses getting their start. And so they had this somewhat like a little mini mall, and people had stalls and they would sell their goods. And I went,
something drew you there.
I mean, when you walk, it's right across the street from the Apollo on 125th Street. And the Apollo is a famous theater with live music, James Brown. People got their starts. They had an amateur night and it was a tough crowd. So if you
That's
made
right.
it there, you can make it anywhere.
Right.
There's some famous singers rolled through there. Aretha Franklin,
Mm-hmm.
some big names have rolled through there and made it, you know, and pleased the crowd. So right across from there was Mart 125. And that's where, all the different entrepreneurs had their goods and they would sell and speak about connection. Because out of all the people in there,
Mm-hmm.
I wound up developing a relationship with Azabuke is his name. And, you know, from the lab at Montclair State, I can bring the X-Acto knives and all the surgical tools because I wound up helping him design his T-shirts because now I had the skill of drawing and I can draw the images that he wanted for his T-shirts. And at the time, it was silk screening. So there was a thin film of plastic called an acetate, and you had to kind of cut into the acetate to get the image so that when you went over it with the ink would just come where the acetate was cut out. So I would use these fine swivel X-Acto knives, where I can get the corners, and I would borrow from my equipment at school that we would use for surgery on our experiment on rats. I would take that and go and work in his workshop. And I learned these entrepreneurial skills there
Mm-hmm.
and how they worked. And now marijuana wasn't just a way for me to quiet my emotions. It grew into a whole cultural and spiritual healing that was utilized among these group of people who were Rastafarians. So now it's a whole way of life that I'm learning about that has to do with honoring the ways of God and honoring what God has planted on this earth for our health and well-being. So that began to open up a whole new ritualistic understanding
Mm-hmm.
of a technology within a community that allows a connection to a higher source and each other. Because they would take breaks and stand in a circle and pray together with what they call a chalice. And they would pray, and that they would tell me, hold it steady and hold it level, so we let our prayers go off in a balanced and good way.
Mm-hmm.
Similar to smoking the pipe in the indigenous ways, like that smoke represented the breath of our creator,
Mm-hmm.
and we can connect to that with our breath and send that sacrament on.
So you were able to reframe your use of marijuana.
Yeah, because I had it that something was wrong with me, and it was making me falter, making me, it was ruining my life. I had that idea before I met Ozzy. And I must say, that's one of those moments when we were talking earlier about when I discover the connection
Mm-hmm.
and what it can do, what connection can do. That's a moment. That's a very deep moment considering where I was at 19 years old, or maybe more like 21, where I was at that time in my life. Deep search for meaning and wanting a connection that could calm the noise inside. And he invited me to Jamaica on a business trip to build a factory. And he wanted to be at the center of everything red, gold, and green because there was a lot of duplicating going on in merchandising at the time in New York. So other places in Europe or Korea or other places were duplicating the popular items and just creating mass numbers. And then you can buy them wholesale. So now people who are involved in this kind of business can get cheaper items to
Mm-hmm.
sell. And so now the people that are even from the country's colors, they're buying, from outside wholesalers. And Ozzy wanted to create a Jamaica owned wholesaling network. So we went to Jamaica to start that.
I'm really curious, Akah, about the transition of the use of this plant medicine
Mm-hmm.
from something that was quieting a noise, something that was helping you navigate a misalignment between maybe something else that was calling you, your heart, your passions, and this path that maybe your family said, hey, you need to be a doctor in this way. And you spoke a little bit about how you were feeling this challenge about being in this program that you were in, but you also spoke about some emotional noise. So my question is open. It's an open-ended question, but how did this plant medicine transition you from using it to quiet a noise to potentially connecting more deeply with spirit or whatever it did for you? I'm very interested how meeting with this mentor from Jamaica shifted your experience of this plant medicine and how it
Mm.
supported you.
Oh, wow. Such an incredible question because I remember the plants and the herbs that were used by my great great auntie and by our family to a degree. I remember the wanting to connect to the natural medicine, which gravitated me towards marijuana and the offerings of these various ways to quiet the noise and to numb out are pretty typical in the metropolitan area. Cocaine, alcohol, marijuana, and the other hallucinogens are present, acid. But for me, it was something about the plant, the fragrance of it. It was some kind of connection that was taking place that didn't create the noise after I used it. It helped me to quiet down, but I didn't feel a whole lot of, headaches or sickness after, as it would other things. So, which meant for me, it made myself more noisy after. If I drank alcohol, I would feel more noisy inside afterwards. But meeting Ozzy as a person who grew up in a culture that honored this plant as a sacrament of God, then he took me to Jamaica. Then I met other Rastafarians that not only thought that that was the sacrament, but other plants and all of creation is designed to help us and support us. So meeting people, and Ozzy would take me out to a plantain leaf, and I had my ivory soap in my hands, and I had my washcloth, and I was going to go ahead and wash in the gully where the stream ran. He said, "Where you going, man?" "Sure. What you go there for?" "Let me show you God's washcloth, Aya." And he took me to a young plantain, banana leaf, plantain leaf. It had these beads of dew on it. And he just took the leaf and washed his face with it. He says, "Now, Dede, Dede, the washcloth of God." I proceeded, having acne. I said, "Let me try it." At that time, right? By the fourth day, my skin is glowing, pimples are disappearing, dark spots are disappearing. 2 weeks, I have no blemishes at all. Nothing is popping out. In the morning, they would bring this fresh goat milk and cow milk mix,
Mm-hmm.
and they would make a cacao herbal drink. Pick the cacao, toast the cacao, go out and pick. He says, "I'll be back. Don't let it boil." And he'd go out and he'd come back with a handful. It just looked like he just raked his hand in some bushes, grasses and leaves. It just looked like a bunch of bush. He dropped that in the pan. I drank that every morning.
Amazing.
Connection, like what came into my body and connected with me, invoked and awakened my connection to what's in me. This natural mystic. When I say mystic, this natural mystic is Bob Marley's song, this natural mystic flowing through the air. If you listen carefully, you will hear. And there is this invisible, extraordinary energy of life that I discovered. They took me to Dunn's River, where they say it will wash the connection between your soul and your heart. You find your place to sit and you let the river flow over you. And when you get it just right, they say, you feel like the river's flowing through you. And I had my moment with that. So that is that connection from meeting Asi on 125th Street in Harlem, New York,
Wow.
to Dunn's River, which is coming out of a spring. It becomes this huge river going into the Caribbean. To have that moment of having my cleanse, my soul connection cleansed, that led me to West African drumming. It led me to indigenous ceremonies. It led me to the healing ministry and meeting Max Borisov and training as a healing minister. And that was very much in alignment with my desire to really connect to the medicine way of living. And so that transformed the whole pursuit of medicine into now holistic health, training as a healing minister, which was spiritual counseling and herbal formulation, and educating people about holistic ways of living, which led me to being invited to serve as an adventure therapist at a prestigious treatment center called Passages in Malibu.
Mhm.
And then a friend of mine who invited me there was doing his PhD in psychotherapy. And he invited me to help him out with his spiritual counseling and spiritual therapy clients.
Mhm.
And that I moved over to there, helping him with those clients. And then he left to pursue his career as a psychotherapist in training, but able to run an energy center that dealt with people who are dealing with various types of addiction in Canada. So he left Passages, which meant I took over the workload. So all of these events I feel are connected.
I want to go back briefly to that moment of you at the river.
Oh, there.
And did you say it was
Dunn's River,
Dunn's River
Ocho Rios.
in Jamaica? Do you remember that experience?
So vividly.
Can you share with me your experience?
So I get the notice one morning, we're going to take you to Dunn's River, man. You must go to the river. Now, this river has a history of being if you hear the stories of the fountain of youth, it's said that this is one of those places on earth that is considered to be the fountain of youth by the indigenous people, news spreading to Europe, and people would come. It was a truce grounds among all the indigenous people of the Caribbean, known throughout the Caribbean. And when it was visited, it was always a peaceful area, never any squabbles, as they would say, never any disagreements go on there. It was strictly for healing and restoration. So I was, well, what is this place? So first we climbed the river. You have to really be aware because it's slippery. So you really have to be aware when you climb. And when you get to the top, it just bubbles out up out of the ground. So when you see it from the foot of it going into the ocean or the Caribbean Sea, it's a pretty vibrant river, kind of wide.
Mhm.
And I wonder, how am I going to find my way up it? But there, as if it reveals the place when you calm yourself. So I remember having to calm myself, my mind spinning, how am I going to climb this? Because the natives are just stepping up it like it's a playground, the monkey bars at the playground.
Were you walking up through the water?
Yeah, you walk up through the water and you find that place more to the side
Uh-huh.
where the feet fit just right. And there's a
Barefoot?
barefoot. Yeah. You have to pause sometimes to really be able to take that next step without slipping. So there's a real deep focus. But getting to the top, and there's this watercress, like these herbs. It's a scene out of a movie. And it's just bubbling up like a crater. It looks like a crater.
How far is it from the sea, roughly, to the source, the head of where it's
Yeah.
coming out of the earth? Is
I
it
guess we must have climbed for about 15 minutes or
so not far?
it's not far. It's not far at all. It's just trying to think of an analogy that if you imagine a football field, it's about half as wide. And then the journey up can be like from the goal line to the 50-yard line.
Wow. Okay. So you're moving slow and mindful.
Yeah, slow and mindful. And not that the height escalates a lot, but, and then getting to the top, because there is a wonder, like, what is it going to look like up top? And then about halfway up, it starts to come into view. It's important not to get too excited, stay sure-footed, because it is real easy to slip. But once up there,
Mm-hmm.
very roundish, very womb-like,
Hmm.
and the water is just bubbling out of the ground. It's not a kind of a spout or like you might see a little stream flowing from out the earth. It's just a large area, like a womb, and it's just bubbling up out of the ground.
Hmm.
Out of the experience, that's close to the experience of feeling the river flowing through, just the way, and it's shallow, and it's some bottom to it. It's not as if it's bottomless,
Mm-hmm.
where you can get in and sit like a pool. It's rather surface and it's just coming through the rocks.
Mm-hmm.
That moment, we talk about a moment of connection, because now it's a feeling, it's not necessarily a thought. It's, yes, my eyes are seeing something I've never saw before, but there's a feeling underneath my feet, the coolness of the water. The water is really cold almost, I could say. We're in this tropical environment. It's very warm, and this water is cold. And I'm wondering, how could it be so cold being in this warm environment?
Hmm.
So there's that, and just the atmosphere around the area feels really ionically charged. Now, I'm unaware of these concepts in nature and these ways in which nature expresses itself that allows this healing energy to flow around Mother Earth. But I do remember feeling it and being in a sense of awe that the noise has stopped. I wasn't even paying attention to it. And I had to slow down on smoking the marijuana because of moments like that. There were moments that would pop up where I really had to be focused. And if I smoked the marijuana there, it was totally different than the marijuana in New York. No matter what strain of high vibrational creation the marijuana was in New York, Thai stick, Himalayan this, or chocolate that, what was grown down there in Jamaica.
Hmm.
As they say, you can squeeze it together and stick it on the wall and put a piece of paper on top, and it'll hold that note. It was the stickiest of stickiest. And it would take me out.
Mm.
It was hard to be focused with. So I couldn't smoke it as I would if I was in America.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember being really focused and conscious. I wasn't, half high when I'm telling you this. I had to really be focused on what was going on. And the river itself, talk about connection, the river itself and the way it flowed, and I guess the minerals that were inside would create these almost like a sheen, like a porcelain like surface.
Mm-hmm.
So when you stepped and it was going from one level to the next, it was the curves of the angles and the corners were very soft and gone over by these minerals. So you couldn't just tuck your toe in a nook. You had to really like anchor your foot somewhere and have a real conscious awareness of connecting.
Mm-hmm.
Now that I think about it when you ask that question. So I could say that moment, meeting Dunn's River,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it opened up my connection to nature in Alabama as a
Mm-hmm.
child. Like it started to galvanize these moments into a guidance system where I was being guided, where I didn't have the brain that wrote out the bucket list of what I wanted to do. So, I mean, I've had therapeutic analysis. I don't give too much to the names and to the traumas. And all of these labels. What I do know is that if I had the capacity without knowing how to create a bucket list after leaving my pre-med studies and my pursuit of genetic research,
Mm-hmm.
that was the thing that was on my mind as the thing to do. But if I didn't know what to do after that, then I didn't. I was just following a path of easing the noise and finding peace. That's what I wanted.
After you had that experience of connection at Dunn's River, did the quality of the noise change with or
Absolutely.
without marijuana?
Absolutely. It did change.
So that experience of connection created a shift within you.
It was a shift. And now to have the shift happen, I could look at it now. But going through it, I knew I was changing. I had a similar experience coming from Jamaica home after a month or so. And that same feeling I had coming from Alabama to Jersey City,
Mm-hmm.
feeling stronger,
Uh-huh.
feeling more confident, feeling more embodied. I didn't have these words at that time, but I definitely felt stronger. I definitely felt my vision was clearer. And that began, almost this awakening into looking at herbs as medicine, looking at plants as medicine, being more
Mm-hmm.
curious about that aspect of my family was beginning to awaken as Ozzy had certain family traditions, what they call a wood root tonic, which had about 99 ingredients.
Wow.
And it was a fermentation
Mm-hmm.
process. Sometimes it gets so powerful, like he would simply use one of those plastic garbage cans, clean it out, kind of made by Tupperware is what I remember, but it had a seal lid to it. And he would ferment all the ingredients. And one day I remember in the lab and, in his workshop, and it was a place where one person would be making buttons of famous people, from the Caribbean, like Marcus Garvey or Bob Marley or different artists or revolutionaries that helped get their independence from England. And another person would be making jewelry. Another person would be making T-shirts. It was a real operation he had going on.
Mm-hmm.
And one day we heard this big boom, and all the wood root tonic was all over the floor. The whole vat had exploded.
Whoa.
It was, but it's things like that that connected me to see that process,
Mm-hmm.
to be part of maybe chopping up some of the ingredients, not knowing how powerful it is. But this connection of looking at marijuana as a way to stop noise
Mm-hmm.
and then looking at marijuana as a herb,
Mm-hmm.
as part of the medicinal pharmacopoeia
Mm-hmm.
of planet Earth that has a history as an agent of healing and restoration.
Mm-hmm.
There was a shift there that was really profound.
It really seems like you were often being pulled away from a conventional Western experience. Something was pulling you towards something different, something more indigenous, more traditional. Tell me about that.
Mm. Imagine a young man, 21 years old, searching for inner peace and, a way to be financially secure based on what family wanted and trying to make it in society. And then the connection to people. along the way. Having a roommate that we pledged the same fraternity. He actually pledged me into fraternity. So that whole connection to people and wanting brothers, because I was an only child. So wanting brothers. And then he wanted to break into comedy and modeling, so stand-up comedy. So he wound up becoming my roommate because I needed a roommate to help out with rent in New York. And so that became a connection. And he got his big break needing someone as he was working as an elevator operator at the Marriott Hotel in Times Square and met somebody from Hollywood who took a liking to him, heard his story, stand-up comic, wanted to write comedy, and they offered to be his mentor. And long story short, came to the place of being invited to California to pitch his script that he wrote. Script got bought, and thus he's calling me from Pacific Palisades. Hey, you got to come see California. And at this time, I'm thinking surfboards, blonde hair, and bikinis. How's that going to help me find inner peace? Right? And this is just after Jamaica.
Whoa.
I'm in Jamaica in June, July, and he's inviting me in November. And
When it's getting cold in New York.
It's starting to get cold in NYC. So I'm saying to myself, okay, something's calling me.
Mm-hmm.
And I went, and it was really something to be in the West. With all the buildings in the East, everything's older and built up. The West is more spread out.
Mm-hmm.
The beaches are not like the ones on the East Coast. The Pacific Coast the beaches are large.
Mm-hmm.
You see forever. You can go up on a mountaintop and you could see forever.
What year are we talking right now?
Right now, we are talking about 1989.
Okay.
1989. And the view was this is just the connection to the view that's bringing this experience of expansion,
Mm-hmm.
which I get the whole philosophy of going west, this because I got the stories from my great uncle who I connected to there. Didn't know he went west to find a better way of life out of segregation of the South in Noma, Florida, panhandle of Florida. So there's this sense of expansion that is really creating a connection to quieting the noise inside. Never expected that. So let's say come through to 1990, and now I'm going back and forth between California and New York. I meet an artist collective in New York. I'm going to California pitching these ideas because this artist collective is making beads, making their own beads. So I'm learning how to make our own beads. And there's this gentleman, Cormac, he's the medallion master, and he's making these ornate adornments for artists that are in the hip hop industry, the rap industry. And so I'm going pitching these ideas to jingle companies to sell beads to their, you know, customers that they can give to their children that are hip, that's in the videos. I'm able to give them the beads that are in these videos. And then I add some meaning to it with crystals and talismans that come from Ethiopia, and I can make it meaningful for them as well. And I pitch that idea, they go for it. So sometime I come out with a $5,000 contract to do 24, do 24 dozens of a particular simple design. And then I go back to New York and spread the money around and get to working with the crew. So I had that back and forth thing going on for a while. 1992, a woman named Oshun,
Mm-hmm.
who was an Orisha, right, in the spiritual way of living out of Nigeria called Ifa,
Mm-hmm.
who is also a guardian of my grandmother. When you're in Santeria, which is an offshoot of Ifa, which was held by the slaves in the various islands, this spiritual way of looking at life and connecting to nature.
What islands?
So you have it in Cuba, you have it in most of Puerto Rico, you have it in Trinidad.
This is a spirituality?
This is a spiritual way of living, connecting to the spiritual energies of nature. And they have similarities to the Hindu gods,
Mm-hmm.
where you have, for example, Shango is the god of thunder, but this sense of this powerful creative force of consciousness, which is similar to Shiva. I
Mm-hmm.
imagine this similar. You have Lakshmi,
Mm-hmm.
who is this goddess of abundance and was associated with the ocean. And you have Yemeya, who is this goddess of the ocean and associated with this nourishing energy of mother. So this abundance and this flow. You have Saraswati, who is associated with, instruments and beauty and the flow of life. And you have Oshun, who is
Mm-hmm.
the goddess of beauty and the river. And she also brings these mystical experiences that are associated with music. And so there's this way of connecting to these forces of nature through these deities.
Where did you meet her?
So I met connection of people. Now here we are with this connection of people. All right. So let me just take a little bit of back history to say that my mother was adopted by a curandera in New York who was Cubano. And Cuba is where there's a strong hold of Santeria, which is this spiritual way of living connected to these aspects of nature that are personified as these gods and goddesses.
Okay.
And the, the curandera, who is a priestess,
Uh-huh.
will look at you and tell which ones, through her divination, it could be coconuts, it could be shells that they throw at your feet, and they might choose some of them and they throw them at your feet. Now, I forgot all about this. At 8 years old, I went through a whole ritual ceremony of being cleansed and being brought into connection with my, as they say, mama and papa. And we could also look at them as spiritual guardians.
Mm-hmm.
And they can tell who are your spiritual guardians out of the Orishas. So for my grandmother, her mama and papas, but particularly her mamas, were Oshun and Yemeya. So when my grandmother made her transition in 84, all my cousins were going for the gold and the rings and all those things, and they gave me, as the youngest of that generation, her packet of beads, because there are beads that represent each of the Orishas, so that you have that bead string of beads with you that have a particular color pattern that represents that Orisha. So Yemeya is blue and white.
Mm-hmm.
Oshun is red and orange, or gold, I should say, more gold and red, right? So they gave me her beads,
Mm-hmm.
and I wound up with those two beads, and I just lived with them. They felt good, so I'm talking about connection. So I go to this Kemetic temple in LA. I get it,
What kind of temple?
a Kemetic temple. So Kemet is
Ah, Kemet.
right. So the ancient civilization of Egypt.
Right.
Yeah. So a Kemetic temple called a Kara.
Mm-hmm.
So I was invited there to participate in their ceremonies and their Sunday rituals, which is reading, the various spiritual texts that come out of that area. And at the temple are two beings, two beautiful women. One is named Yemeya, and the other is named Oshun.
And these are real living women.
These are real living women. And
I don't know right now with you, Akah. I don't know what's going on here.
they're real living women at this temple. My jaw is dropping when I get introduced to them because I have the beads on at this time.
Really?
So 1984, my grandmother made her transition. I got the beads. I've been living with these beads on my body 24/7. It's 1992, July.
What? 84 to 92?
It's
And you got
1992.
these two beads on you?
I still got them on. By this time, I'm making beads too.
Uh-huh.
And I think that's making these healing strands. They're really long. They go across the body, and I do it from a scientific perspective where it represents the genetics in their name, right? So I look at their name as a sequence of colors, and I associate that with the beads. So I choose complementary colors. So anyway, I think that's how I got invited to this temple because they knew about my work, seeing it around the city,
Okay.
these healing strands, and they wanted to bring me to meet the women at the temple because they kept asking about them. That's how I
Okay.
got invited to the Kemetic temple.
Okay.
And I wound up being commissioned to make these beads, these healing strands,
Yeah.
crystals, and some handmade beads from the collective, the artist collective, Love Vibrations people. And I put crystals in there and color schemes that were complementary for a person's, what I thought was their aura, read from their name. So I would read their name and I'd create this color coded aura from their name because
Intuitively?
every letter or group of letters is associated with a number, 1
Right.
through 9.
Mhm.
So I took the chakra system and took the colors from the chakra system associated with that number. And then I incorporated that schematic into the bead design.
Mhm.
That's how I was called to that temple.
Okay.
But when I met Yemeya and Oshun, I couldn't believe it. Oshun, maybe about 2 weeks later, said, I have a special place to take you to called Mahutasan, an intertribal preserve, where they're preserving the various cultures and traditions of indigenous people of California.
Where is this?
That
I mean, it's probably secret, but like what general area is
I
it?
mean, it was a mountain plateau, not too far from Santa Barbara, not too far from
Okay.
Fraser Park, not too far from New Cuyama.
Because I have heard echoes of this before, but I don't know much about this.
Right. It's in this unusual, it's about 4,000 feet up, a mountain plateau that used to be running streams and swamps during time when it was cared for by the Chumash. But as
That's the tribe of
that's the
that.
tribe that lived in the area, this particular
Okay.
area, the Chumash people.
Okay.
And so when agriculture began to develop and the colonialism began to expand, they started to channel some of the springs and create the aqueduct system that's famous in the agricultural system of California, which channels water from various places like the Colorado River. But that dried up the swamps. I mean, it's such a mystical place because there's this formation of stone structures that was a birthing place for the indigenous people of the area. And there are these bubbles from volcanic activity. You can tell it was underwater because you can find these shells in this area. And there's these huge bubble-like enclaves that's large enough to hold two people, many of them, where women would go and give birth. So this was where I had my first Mahutasan, is where I first had my experience of a ceremony where you go into an igloo-like structure, for those who are not aware of a sweat lodge. You go into this igloo-like structure held together by a framework of willow trees covered in these tarps. And there's a center altar where the stone people would go. And there's one who pours water, and there's a structure outside, a pit, where the wood and the stone people are come together with the fire. It wakes up the wisdom in the stone people that were here when creation was created. And then they're brought into the Sweat lodge, we crawl in on all fours. It's dark, so it's a symbol of a metaphor of returning to the womb
Yes.
where we all began. And now this is the cosmic womb. And brother, when I heard those words for the first time,
Mm-hmm.
it was like it echoed into a chamber within me that awakened a memory. I never felt myself get so quiet.
Was that in 1992?
July 19, June 1992.
I don't recollect the month, but 1992 was my first sweat lodge. And I had a very similar experiential kinesthetic awakening.
I'm getting chills now.
So I am right with you,
Oh,
Akah.
my bones, my bones.
1992. So please continue. I'm with you.
My bones began to vibrate. I began to feel myself. And as I talk to you about it now, I can see the connection to Dunn's River as a preparation because I was with the water. And then I came to the fire.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's like a desert environment where it was off the grid. So when you went to the land, my ears would ring as if I was in a club or something. And I hear the music when I came out of the club. I keep hearing the music. Even I wake up the next morning, kind of hear that ringing in my ear. It would take about 3 days for it to go away. And then I could hear my heartbeat, just at a drop of a just be still and focus. The land is so mystical like that. We would go on walks with my elder brother, Kelly, and Turtle Hawk, who was the leader of the ceremony there. And we would let the wind take us where we were to go. And then we might wind up in a chia seed.
Tell me what you mean by that. You would let the wind take
So
you.
Kelly, we would go on walks, and Kelly was so incredible. He would find plants to draw. He was a naturalist, and he worked with the Forestry Service, and rehabilitated hawks and condors and bears. And he was really incredibly tuned into nature. So here is a moment of what I imagine to be a walkabout in North America, where we just allow the energy of nature to guide our walk.
Okay.
So in this case, the guide was the wind.
Mm-hmm.
And we'd get up early in the morning, just after the sun rose. He'd have his coffee. He says, "All right, Brother Wind, where shall we go today?"
Uh-huh.
And then we feel it and we walk that way. Sometimes you could really feel like when I thought we should go a certain way because I was curious about something
Yeah.
that I saw, you could feel the wind. I could feel it in my face. Don't go that way. On my side. And then I could feel it on my back.
So you were really listening deeply to the wind.
As if I was hearing with my feeling sense. So my whole body became a ear, if you will,
Mm-hmm. Almost like a divining rod.
almost like a divining rod, having that level of sensitivity. And I would say it helped to sleep on the earth there because I would go and I would stay for 2 weeks, maybe 3. I'd stretch it, but I'd have to get back to my duties and figure out life and do those kind of things.
But you're really talking about a deep listening.
Yes. And being connected to the deep listening in a way where I wasn't listening to my thoughts that were connected to limiting stories
Mm-hmm.
about who I am, the dark side of connection, connecting to a shortcoming, or a lack of something.
You were able to listen and not let that noise distract you from where you really needed to walk and be.
In this moment, I have this. There was a woman who was very profound in her skill of hypnotizing people, and they would have hypnotherapy at passages to help people come out of their addictions and go into those spaces, those unconscious spaces where patterns develop and get buried. And I remember going through a session with her, and just what you're saying, that ability to go in and listen to the appropriate signals that are more in alignment with the truth of who I am, as she would take me into a hypnotic state and plant seeds of positive affirmations or truths about my being that she recognizes. And what it was to forward into the land of Mahutasan. And not necessarily is there a person recognizing my positive attributes, but I am an expression of nature. And as an expression of nature, there's an intelligence, there's a beauty, there's a guidance, there's an empowerment, there's a nourishment that takes place beyond what my mind is saying about who I am. And that level of quietness, where, in a sense, the trained mind of society is it's almost in a cocoon, like in an incubator. It goes into this quiet space, and it no longer, for me, it no longer has such a vibrant way of speaking about the negative attributes of my being. It might surface if I think about going home, I think about the things I need to face. But there's this connection to nature that I experienced there. And then the connection to people, to not be connected to being African American, for example, and everything that went along with that in the history of America, but to just be connected to being me as a being of the universe, the being that is from the medicine wheel, for example. And when I say medicine wheel, everyone, there's this way of looking at the journey of life and how we all participate in it. The experience of our mental body and having a mind. All humans, we have this experience of our mind. So that aspect of the east direction, and then going into the emotional direction of the south in this medicine wheel as it was shared at Mahutasan, where we all have this experience of our emotions and our feelings at the various stages of life. And then there's that experience of being in the physical body, the West. We all have our experience of being in this physical body from childhood till we leave this body. And then the experience of our energy nature, our spiritual nature in the North, and what it is to remember to dwell in the center and allow the experience of life to unfold in these various ways of mind, emotional feelings, physical, and spirit, but to dwell in the center of that wheel. And so when we went out on those walks, it was that sense of how can I just be? And then therefore the next thing to think about is what Brother Wind or the wind wants me to do.
Mm.
And so it was a mind expanding experience to consider my connection to nature in that way, to play with the clouds. Turtle Hawk and Bonnie, the purveyors over the land that cared for the land, they had 8 children. So sometimes with the younger children, they would say, come on, let's play with the clouds. And we'd look at the sky and think about a dog, see if we could see a dog. think about a heart and see if we could look at the clouds until they formed a heart and have that playful connection to nature. That was also a moment of this awakening of a spiritual way of living and not just an allopathic, uh, analytical way to look at nature from a biological point of view, physiological point of view, that there was more to understanding how we operate in this body. And it was 6 months after that sweat lodge that I met Max Borisov, who was my mentor in training me to be a healing minister, right? Herbal formulation. So I went through training on formulating as well as now spiritual counseling. And he had an experience of Christ that left him with x-ray vision. When he doubted Christ after fighting in World War II, he said, how could such travesties happen to humanity if there is a God?
Yes.
And he left his family. He had to figure that out. And he wound up having an experience with Christ consciousness. And it left him with these abilities, x-ray vision. So he wound up working as an orthopedic assistant. And all that is a series of miracles. And he had clairvoyance, really deep clairvoyance, where he could see moments in people's lives to help them transition from out of an addictive state to a liberated state.
How long were you an herbalist?
I started,
Maybe you still are, but
right,
but
right.
but how long were you a practicing herbalist?
Herbalism. Met him in 1992. Let's see, 1994. And then trained with him until 2000, where he ordained me as a healing minister. And then he also passed on to me the responsibility of running the healing ministry, which was part of the First Evangelical Church of Christ. And he followed the ecclesiastic code, which looked at the leaves of the trees and the herbs are for the healing of the nations. So he was a deep follower of the ecclesiastics
Hmm.
and thus began my journey of understanding the mystical aspect of Christianity as it emerges out of the mystics of the Middle East, the Essenes,
Mm,
which taught about the holistic way of living, really.
so beautiful. I don't know a great deal about the Essenes, but I have been hearing lately that Jesus spent time with the Essenes or
Hmm.
was an Essene, and
Exactly that.
that it was, well, maybe you can share a little bit about what the Essenes are.
Yeah, a sect that protected the teachings and the even the aside from just scriptures, there is a sense of what are the ways to live this life
Mhm.
and to live it in a sense of, as they might say, righteousness, but to not look at right or wrong, but to be in harmony with creation and the creator of creation. And what are the scrolls that describe to us the ways to do that? Describe to us, for example, they would say in the Sermon on the Mount, or no, the Essene Gospel of Peace for everyone, if you want to look that up, which is a translation from the Dead Sea Scrolls about the Sermon on the Mount, which is a famous teaching. Whereas they say the Essenes would bring these teachings, and as you just said, the one that accepted the Christ nature called Jesus or Yeshua or Isa would share these teachings with the people. And so if it is one person or many, there is this sense of sharing, like we have the practice of yoga today. We have the practice of panchakarma in Ayurveda. We have the practice of Qigong and medical Qigong. So in this era
Mhm.
and time, we have these ways of being connected to nature where they will say, be with the angel of air, take off all your clothes and allow the angel of air to come all around you and cleanse you so that your body will no longer have the odor of your transgressions. Allow the breath, through the breath, allow the angel of air to come into you. And the same will be said about the angel of water. And they talk about find a long gourd and allow the angel of water to come into you through your orifices. You know, they speak in this way, like no man shall serve two masters. Either they serve life or they serve death. Either they serve death, the devil, or Beelzebub and his devils. That's the way they say it, right? Or they serve life and all of her angels. So there's this talk by the Essenes where it's not just a spiritual text, it's considered a way of life. And they write and preserve the writings of these ways that share the protocols to be in harmony with life. So our life can be abundant. So our life we can be clear vessel for the name of the Creator to live, for example. Like if you find in the Lord's Prayer, which is a famous alchemy text, and when you find that interpreted from the Aramaic language that Yeshua spoke, and it was in the church library where I discovered all this. Having a rock bottom emotionally, wound up living in the church. And I had a makeshift room in the library, the church library. So talking about connection, now I'm connected to these Greek lexicon Bibles, these Lutheran Bibles, these Calvinism Bibles, these, Bibles about miracles, these Bibles about the Council of Nicaea, where they wrote out certain things and wrote in other things and learning about that and about the Nazarenes and Ethiopian Bible, all these things were going on. So talking about connection, being guided through that connection.
Is there anything else that you would like to share as a parting offering?
Yeah, I did extensive research. I had the opportunity, still with my laboratory mind from my days in the genetics lab and the tissue culture lab. I still had this, and then I met Brene Brown and all her research around vulnerability, and I had this pool of people that I would talk to, sometimes 8 people a day at Passages at the treatment center. I realized I have an opportunity to find out about our human character and what causes us to be connected to a thought that diminishes our ability to take care of ourselves, that degrades our self-love and our abilities that are connected to self-care. What is it that keeps a human being that's able to wash themselves, they're able to dress themselves, they're able to get in a car and go to a store, they're able to fulfill tasks?
Yeah.
What is it that would keep them from taking care of themselves to the level of not drowning out their nervous system and numbing from life because of usually a particular thought that is connected to hundreds of stories?
A core thought.
A core thought that would create these stories that diminishes their ability to stop a certain behavior that is destroying their health. I was like, what is it? And particularly around people that would relapse. They come and they get it is a rigorous self-care program from 8 in the morning to almost 8 at night.
At Passages.
There's a
recovery treatment program.
Recovery treatment program.
Yeah.
There is a psychotherapist. There's a marriage and family therapist. There is a chemical dependency therapist. There's a hypnotherapist. There's a physical therapist. There's a spiritual therapist. And there's equine therapy. And there's adventure therapy where you go out into nature, right? With all of these modalities,
Beautiful.
every day going through all of them, maybe with the exception of equine therapy and adventure therapy, maybe 2 or 3 times a week. All of those therapies are available along with group therapy, various kinds. What causes this switch to not go on? Talking about the switch of self-care, the switch of even a basic primal directive within our instincts of self-preservation. That switch of even self-preservation might bring them to passages, but what causes it to go back off when they leave and then return again?
The switch of diminishment.
That switch of self-preservation where it turns on and I'm going to preserve myself. I'm going to take care of myself. I'm going to do what I need to do. I've learned all of these modalities, this breathing and how to think about myself, hypnotherapy, movement, yoga. I've learned these things. Qi Gong I would teach in the group. So I have these sound therapy. And when I leave, that self-preservation switch turns off and I return to my drinking. I return to my cocaine. What is it that would keep a person locked into a pattern of behavior that would diminish their life force to the point of leaving their body? I've had, the disappointment of losing some clients, that could not turn on the switch of self-preservation for themselves.
And what did you find?
And I think in
What is it?
sharing this finding, I think it's important for people to hear that within us, as we talk about connection,
Mm-hmm.
this connection awakens an ability in me. When I had that connection with Dunn's River, even if I didn't know what was happening, I knew when I was invited to that some 89 to 92, when I was invited to that drum class, that that switch of not just self-preservation, but of exploring life in a way where I evolve and expand beyond my normal patterns of living,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that switch of adventure, right? That sense of learning more about myself and discovering more of what I'm here for, that I have an ability to do that. So what I'm speaking to when I talk about that switch is now moving it from just self-preservation switch
Mm-hmm.
to these abilities that we have to grow, to learn, to live this life and discover everything we are, and how that stimulated me to experience West African drumming. I had no idea about it. I didn't have it as something I wanted to do in life because I experienced a powerful transformation from it. I was invited into it and I kept going into it. Even to the circle of men that was sitting there with their instruments. It wasn't like it was a great big, hey man, how you doing? We're having a drum class. You want to join? It was far from that. Very strong men and very focused on what they're doing. I'm standing there and they're looking at me. They said, well, what are you doing here? I said, well, Baba said, come over here and get some of this. I don't even know what this is. And they look at me. It's quiet. So, well, what do you want to do? Why are you just standing there? Well, I don't know what to do. Where do I begin? I don't even know. It's an African drum class. Start over there. They showed me the bass drum. Start over there. Like what was pulling me? What was connecting me to that bass drum? Where I
Mm-hmm.
walked over there, I stayed in that forward movement of life. So that's what I mean about that switch of forward movement of life, that I moved in 2005 away from the marijuana.
Mm-hmm.
There was something awakening in my abilities that I wanted to explore. And that's what I'm speaking to. The people that returned to passages and relapsed, and maybe seem like they're stuck in this loop, this Groundhog Day, as they would say. There was this sense that internally they didn't find their connection to their abilities, their ability to love themselves. They could say, I love me at the end of the month program or 3 weeks. They could realize it's important to do that, but they didn't connect to that ability and allow it to be their experience of loving themselves and keep stepping forward into discovering how that ability can support them. Maybe it might mean, okay, I've stopped drinking, and now that I'm home, that I can go to a yoga class. I have an ability to go to this yoga class like I took it, passages, and do some breathing and do some movement. But instead, I sit home and maybe I put on a YouTube of yoga class. Maybe I get there. But the ability to engage it in a way where there's a connection to the change and the evolution that can take place from my ability to take care of myself. I found out that the people who relapsed or lost their lives, they didn't find their way to connect to their abilities to take care of themselves. And at first, that was really sad to me. Then I realized that I could talk about you have an ability and find a way to draw a bridge to it, like a metaphor. You have an ability. I kept thinking, what could I say? What could I do? What could I demonstrate that they could embody? And then this sense of a, a, a way that we use our power of choice. Sometimes it's unconscious and we don't realize we're using it, but to step into consciously using it, and that is our ability to say yes or no. I can say yes to the experience of smoking marijuana when I find a bag of it when we're empty at our storage unit, our one we built where we were living in Topanga, California, because we're getting ready to move, and me and my daughter are emptying out things, and there's this leather bag, a backpack, and I realize like all the medicines I've placed in there from the years of ceremonies, and as a healing minister and formulating, people who started their dispensaries would give me big Ziploc bags of marijuana to make formulas out of, whether it's a liniment for the joints or antidepressant or help you go to sleep. And I found one of those bags and jars of my own personal plants that would grow around me because of all the seeds that were around. And I say, here's my choice. And I'm with my daughter. She's probably about 3 years old, so she doesn't quite know what I found. But I think here's that ability. I can say yes to rekindling this experience after maybe about 3 years of being off it, because probably about 2008. No, if my daughter's there and 3 years old, it's about 2015. So this has been tucked away for a good 8 years, this bag. I mean, and there's mushrooms in there. There's things that people have given me as an herbalist or making things for them. So we go to the fireplace and light up the fire and just offer it because I know what it can do for me. So now I'm using my ability to say no. You cannot give me the experience I'm looking for anymore. Our relationship has changed.
What do you think, Akah, in closing, what do you think is it within us that allows us, and I'll switch the metaphor just a little bit. What what do you think allows us to walk the path of light versus and love versus the dark path
Mm.
of let's say, self-rejection or self-hatred,
Right.
what kernel of wisdom can you share with our audience about this ability which you speak
Mm-hmm.
to make a choice in favor of love and light that will allow us to evolve upwards in a sense?
Mm-hmm. I had a moment with a client, and in the beginning, I'd say, allowing the connection to this way we are being loved, to find that way we are being loved right now in this very moment.
Mm-hmm. Open to that.
And there's an ability to be open to that thought. And so I connected to the breath, that when we take this inhale together, what's happening? I'm being taken care of. Everything I need to be me. This is the revelation I had in terms of ability, that yes, that ability is about loving ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
But something about me
Mm-hmm.
is designed to receive something I don't control. I can join in with it and direct it for moments in time. I can do a breathing practice where I count 3 seconds in and hold for 4 seconds and release for 3 seconds and hold out for 4 seconds. I can do a breathing pattern. But when it comes to me making the choice to stop breathing,
Mm-hmm.
I don't have that control. And when I came to that with a client who was having a terrible recovery in her treatment, and the same thing was happening to her daughter, it was just a lineage of shadow, darkness, and she was concerned about her daughter and wanted to leave treatment, but she was literally knocking on the door of death if she left. And when we got to this breathing exercise, she had an epiphany about how she can participate with this love of God for her. It was the love of God that's bringing the Holy Spirit into her. And then she began to do the work. She hadn't seen her daughter, homeless, lost out there in the world. And 2 weeks later, her daughter shows up at Passages for a family session. And they come into my office for a family session. So what I'm speaking to is the miracle of accepting our connection to the way life is designed.
Opening to this inherent flow of love that is always present,
And the
that we
proof,
can be in relationship with, that we can participate with, and that's connection.
and when you look up the word connection, it's associated with relationship. So if this respiratory process is connecting me to my source, and that connection is the link to me knowing my design, why I'm here, what I'm to do here, and there is a supreme love that is taking care of me. Every other ability I have is guided by the one fact that I am taken care of beyond what I can think and control. Something is being done on my behalf. So whatever negative thought I have,
Beautiful.
right? Whatever negative thought I have,
Mm-hmm.
whatever shadow tries to take hold of my stories, and they do
Mm-hmm.
sometimes, that I don't have to linger there
Mm-hmm.
anymore. Even though circumstances will be what they are. Political systems, educational systems, medical systems, they're all doing what they do. but I have this connection and I have the ability to focus on it. So will I say yes to it or will I say no?
Mm-hmm.
So to me,
Mm-hmm.
it benefits me to say yes.
Absolutely.
And that empowers me to say no to the chocolate chips that I get for my daughter's birthday when I am focused on a certain way of taking care of myself. As a 62-year-old, I don't need that sugar like I did. Probably didn't even need it then when I was 12, but I'm saying yes to being in alignment with how I'm being loved when I receive this breath,
Mm-hmm.
not just what my mind wants to taste from its attachment to a memory of sweet on my tongue.
A more subtle food.
Let me get my prana snack. Let me take, prana being the life force,
Yeah.
the life force of creation for those that haven't heard that word. Let me get my prana snack. Let me get my chi snack.
Yes.
Breathe it in and look at the beautiful green leaves that we have here to enjoy this nature. So I say that is one of the most profound things I've learned in all the connections we've talked about today,
Mm.
that I am connected to an energy that has designed me to receive life force and consciousness so that I can be who I am. And I get to create who I am because of this life force and consciousness that finds me. I don't have to go to a hookup station. I don't have to worry about a prana account or a life force and consciousness account. It's given to me. What can I do to take care of it?
Mm-hmm.
Becomes the adventure now that
Beautiful.
I found. Yeah, man.
Thank you, Akah.
Thank you for holding this space of connection.
What a blessing to be with you. How can people get in touch with you if they want to learn more of what you're talking about?
Yes, yes, yes. So when you put up the podcast, you'll see links to various classes. Right now, the website is being developed along these lines to reflect what we're talking about. But if you want to know about the other aspects of connection to sound current, for example,
Mm-hmm.
and how to use your voice to also create this connection to that source of love that is taking care of you,
Mm-hmm.
to help you change states of being that might be dark, dull, distracted, or stupefied, to transform that with something called a mantra, right? You can go to aykanna.com, ikana.com, and there you'll learn about the world of mantra yoga.
Mm-hmm.
Man is mind. So we talk about the mind taking us into these places and traveling in and out of enthusiasm or sadness or courage or fear. How to control the mind with the sound of your voice, chanting a particular prescription that the ancients have written about thousands of years ago. How to control our minds so we stay centered, confident, know that we're loved, know that we're connected to a source and the source flows through us with our voice, be guided intuitively on what to create, to be able to guide ourselves out of the darkness. There are various prescriptions that are written about, and we chant these repeatedly. And it helps to create that pattern, helps to develop that pattern within our nervous system. And this is called mantra yoga. So you can learn all about that at that website, ikana.com.
And I will definitely include that and more on the show notes.
Yeah, in the show notes, you'll learn about the Qigong practice that we do in the garden to be able to connect to nature and use this energy of, if you all look around, anything that you see, it's made up of this life force and consciousness, whether it's the chairs we're sitting in, the food we eat, the trees, the flowers that we enjoy in the springtime. So how can we connect with that, create a relationship with nature? And that's the practice of Qigong. Qi being this powerful force, this phenomenon that allows everything to exist, and then Gong to develop that relationship with it. Right? So you'll see that link where you can.
I'm grateful that I get to practice Qigong with you in the garden at Estrellitas.
Whoa, it's such an experience.
Here in Costa Rica.
Here in Costa
in
Rica, in a
Garza.
blue zone, where the energy is high powered.
Yeah.
Just degrees from the equator. That has been a Dunn's River moment, being in the garden and to watch the seasons change now that we're in rainy season. It's really been powerful. So I appreciate your presence there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, brother. Blessings.
Yes, love to all.
Thank you for joining me on Connection is the Medicine. This podcast is sponsored by the Connection is the Medicine Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to co-creating connection to self, community, nature, and spirit. I hope this conversation inspires you to connect with deeper meaning and purpose in your life. To learn more about our offerings at True Nature in Carbondale, Colorado, and Loma Sagrada in Nosara, Costa Rica, please visit connectionisthemedicine.com. Blessings on your day, and I look forward to visiting with you again soon.